And let's go live on the webinar. That's great. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to Streetworks Conference, day 3. Last session of the day now. And we're exploring the protocol for assessing utility waste with James Thornton, James Camis. I'm going to introduce them in a second. As I mentioned to you yesterday, we'll come to domestics in a second. This session is recorded. I want you just to note that. And we'll talk about using the chat tote shortly. In terms of that. Before we do that, we do have 2 sponsors, one of which is here today actually, Robert Murray, who's from Scooby, and Joel, go ahead and run the video quickly. We just have a quick vid and just get a quick idea about what one of our key affiliate members is up to. Brilliant. Welcome, Scooby. Bob, just turn over the floor to you just for a couple of minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good afternoon, all. My name is Bob Murray, and I'm the MD of Scoob's Energy and Water business. Scoob, we are absolutely delighted to support and sponsor Streetworks UK conference. We've long admirers of Streetworks UK and long associations with Clive and others. We were formed 3 years ago by our founder and CEO, Shashi Sudhajri, and our Chief Operating Officer, Claire Crew. We are a group of some 60 professionals, all subject matter experts in their respective fields, and we only work in energy, water, renewables, and with major utility companies, and this includes the leading IGTs and IDNOs. Uniquely, we are part of our clients' teams, and like a Scoob, we find simple solutions to very complex problems. So focusing on what we do in Streetworks, we focus on the pace of change required for utilities to meet infrastructure deliverables, along with the challenge they face from regulators, and with our focus on energy, water, and fibre connectivity. We prioritise safety, our number one, leakage, connections, digital platforms, and water and energy efficiency. Safety of the workforce and highway users is our number one focus and belief. Our works and field fault management solutions underpin this no compromise culture to the safety of our workforce and public. We believe that everyone has the right to return home from work safe and unharmed. At Scoob, we understand the challenges faced by the utilities because our team, with its wealth of utilities knowledge, have lived and breathed this all our careers. So we may only be 3 years old, but the people in it have a vast experience in utilities. We're firm supporters in the vision for the street and roadworks. We believe we can support the delivery of this across the industry and directly link the vision to the wider business deliverables. Thank you, Streetworks UK, and for your delegates' time to share a little bit about what Scoob is all about. Thank you.
That's great, Bob. Thanks very much. And interestingly, I think I saw a few people there who were just sort of going into their computers and just Googling Scoob just to check exactly what it was. And that's great. You touched on the vision quickly. Let me just
press. What you will see is, you will see when you get on there that there are avatars of us. And mine looks like, if you put a Stetson on me, I'll look like the Milky Bar Kid. So thank you very much.
I'm not sure that's an accolade or not. Let me just put you on the spot very quickly there for a second, Bob. If you touched on the vision there, if there's one aspect of the vision that particularly resonates with Scoob as one of our key affiliates, what would it be out of those 5? Vision, adoption, innovation, skills, collaboration, and protecting the environment, which is obviously what we're here about this afternoon. But out of those 5, which ones do most resonate with you as an organisation?
Well, I think obviously environment and decarbonisation is, and we have a a company that specialises in this and a charity that we're working with. But for me, it's about collaborating with clients and other companies and Streetworks UK, the professional institutions. Today I'm
Okay, well, I think we got the collaboration.
half an hour, I'll be getting a third professional review interview and developing the future of the industry.
Got it. Bob, well, look, thank you. And please stay around and listen in for what I know is going to be a very stimulating and updating session for our members, but may provide you with some new perspective as well. Good. All right. Well, look, let me introduce the Jameses very briefly. James Thornton, who's a Group Environment Sustainability Manager for Clancy, top left on my screen, and James Camis, Environmental Permitting Specialist for Welsh Water. Quick domestics, I just want to remind you it is recorded. Please use the chat tote down the side there to ask any questions. Please don't answer the questions, just makes it harder for the guys to pick up the questions when we're talking about them. And I remember, you know, we're very happy to be responsive to any particular topics you want to raise, but let's keep it broadly around environmental. No JAG colleagues on the call this year. Very much an internal audience, so very much for us to hammer down and get an understanding of what's going on. So without more ado, James, James T, let me turn it over to you to begin with.
Thank you. James T is going to bring up the presentation, I believe.
That should be there.
Yeah, thank you very much. Welcome to our workshop on a new protocol for assessing utility waste and not travelling to Leicester what low carbon affair it is, particularly for me because I haven't put my heating on. It'll come on in half an hour when the kids are home from school. Slide 2, please, James. So there's myself and James Thornton, Group Environment and Sustainability Manager for Clancy Group, representing the interests of the contractor. I'm James Camis, I work for the company Welsh Water, representing Water UK members' interests and those of the client. And together we co-chair the Streetworks UK working group on this issue. I'm sure you will recognise this because we've been here before and at other such events. We debuted this at Streetworks UK in 2018. We're back last year, although I invoked the sick child waiver at the last minute, so didn't attend, but James was there. It was quite fortunate for him because he picked Rising Star Awards in the evening, and it's been great continuing to work with him for a further 12 months. Slide 3, quite brief, you can read it, but I'll dwell on it. Today we're going to outline our progress over the last year. We're going to give an overview of the waste classification sample study for those of you that were not part of the working group or close to a member of the working group or were not at our industry summit. Now, I'm not sure when this event was confirmed to transition from being in Leicester onto Zoom, but my invite certainly didn't turn up until a few weeks ago in my calendar, and I was a bit worried that with a COVID hiatus until last week, we would not have much to report. But we did have a meeting last week on the 19th, and James will run through the goings on at that meeting when we recommence discussions with the EA. Then finally, on solution development, we will detail our vision for taking this forward with the client, the contractor, our regulators and training providers over the next few years. At some point, there might be another word from a sponsor, and then we'll open the floor for questions, something we can never ever truly prepare for, but yesterday's questions gave us a snapshot of how this has still been at the forefront of many minds in the industry. So my final slide. So this is a timeline since the conference a year ago. It's been on this, February 2020. In COVID terms, the idea of a UK lockdown was something from dystopian fiction. We had not seen our first 2 coronavirus cases confirmed in the UK until the 31st of January. So whilst it was in our minds, we were still pretty much unrestrained with business as usual. And there was an industry review group in London, 6th of February. I think that was entitled the Industry Summit, and that was where we presented the data and agreed the scope for developing a proposal for a protocol. That day was actually the day that the third case of coronavirus was confirmed in the UK. The very next day, of February, we had a cross-agency conference with the EA, Northern Ireland EA, NRW in Wales, and SUPR in Scotland. Rather than come to their own conclusions, the other 3 corners of the UK are watching what happens in England very closely. I expect NRW in Wales will mirror the EA stance. SEPA in Scotland do have the Scottish Road Research Board, which have been looking at this for some years. They might go slightly different. Then on the 10th of March, we all met with the EA in London. I remember the oddity of shaking hands and applying alcohol gel straight afterwards, how to make friends. The idea of an extension of RPS 211 was discussed then, since it became clear that we as a group could perhaps do within another 3 months to put things together. Plus, a COVID response was knocking on the door of the EA. We actually felt back then that we could perhaps get COVID over by the summer. Then, on Friday the 20th of March, UK lockdown began. So in April, Streetworks UK submitted a formal request to extend RPS 211 for 6 months, and this was approved and extended to run till October 2020. Then it all went very quiet for the best part of 6 months, with us all working from home and on Microsoft Teams, Zoom, things like that, and seemingly doing more work than usual despite not having to travel anywhere. I don't know how that has happened. I don't know how we'll recover from it. Then October was here. There were some brief discussions with EA on the first proposal draft protocol by exchange of letter and an email. And then it was also agreed to extend the RPS to January 2021 to allow for some further negotiation. Then this month, November 2020, as stated earlier, 19th of November, we reconvened meetings with the EA to discuss their comments on the first draft protocol. We approved the minutes yesterday, and we put together a one-page briefing that we hope to be able to circulate once that's approved, and James will cover aspects of that meeting today. Then, looking forward to January 21, the Streetworks UK working group will develop a proposal to further the work and identify an appropriate solution. We may see the RPS extended again or replaced with a bridging solution to take us through a timeline of testing and recalibration of a protocol as agreed with the EA. So over to James Thornton for the rest of the agenda, beginning with an overview of the waste classification study. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Great overview as well, the timeline. Thank you. Good afternoon all. So as James was alluding to, only recently we met with the Environment Agency to really go through what's been the last 2 years of this work. We took a moment to look at the data. We took a moment to look at the first draft proposal and really hash out what the next steps, what albeit the final steps might be to developing a solution to classification of waste. And really importantly, it's certainly been a while since we managed to sit with the agency and go back through this understanding, this information, and it was certainly with a good push from Streetworks and from Water UK and Energy Networks that we managed to get more so than the Environment Agency officer that we've been dealing with through this process, and actually get a bit of seniority into that meeting, as well as some additional technical guidance and focus from another officer that's focused on developing protocols previously. So an incredibly useful session we had with the agency, and actually what I think is a good turning point for this process, where we're now at a point where we can provide some clarity along it. Now, of course, we can't go through the solution, the proposal, without going back on the data. This time last year, when we presented at the conference in Leicester, we gave an overview to what that data looked like, what our first thoughts were. And actually what we've got now is the end to that data, that end to that first stage assessment of what is waste risks. And we've been able to sit on it, work with the wider steering group, working group and the agency to come up with some real headline points across what the findings from the data were. And I suppose the most important bit that we've all been focused on of recent is these two tables. So between May to August, September 2019, the industry got together and we delivered somewhere near 17 trial studies individually, delivering on 1,600 odd sample results. Inside those sample results, we looked at different waste streams, the asphalt, the sub-base, the mixed wastes, and across those managed to sample an odd 1,200 locations. Now, when we managed to take all that data in and sit with the agency and ourselves and really look at what the headline risks were and actually what the overall classification of hazardous waste was, we came up with the data you see in the table below. And you can see some headline figures here with 18.7% hazardous with asphalt, odd 21% around sub-base, and an odd 15% around mixed waste. But I hope today to dispel a few myths or, I suppose, inaccuracies around communicating that data. And that certainly is a key takeaway from today's session. So when we started to review the data, first and foremost, we identified what was quite 3 headline weaknesses to the study. And in any good study, you will be critical about how it was undertaken. Our first was that the data itself, the samples we took, were very concentrated in certain parts of the UK. Now, it was not a fault of the study, and it certainly wasn't a fault of any guidance or structure. It's really when we asked the question, is 1,600 odd results statistically significant of what is, I think, somewhere around 4 million excavations dug by the industry a year? And certainly the answer is no. And can you profile every type of area that we might be delivering utility works in? Probably not through 1,600 samples again. And so when we looked at the individual studies, when we looked at them by their own merit, what we saw was a focus on certain key areas, certain key towns inside it. And actually what that overall risk, that overall percentage gives us an indication of is that there is a risk of hazardous waste, but it's not at these percentages. It's not enough data, and it's certainly at a localized or regional perspective that these percentages have been created. When we put that with the Environment Agency, they quite clearly agreed with us that it was certainly apparent that there is a risk, there is a solution that's needed to manage said risk, but these percentages aren't the final volumes, they're not the final profile of what that risk will look like. And actually, to get that final profile, we're a couple of years away, easily. And actually what we need is a program of improvement management to finally and truly understand what the overall risk of waste is when digging excavations, when creating excavation arisings. Now, there might be useful data inside each individual study where actually some participants recorded somewhere between 5 to 20% on each circumstance, and it certainly starts to help us profile certain regional areas, but it's still not a headline figure. And what we're doing in the next stages of this work is trying to understand how do we move from understanding risk to what the current proposed solution and where that connect lies. How do we combine an understanding of risk with an understanding and way of management? And that, again, is very a shared agreed outcome from this meeting with the agency the other day. We have got some focus inside what this next part of the study or development might look like. And we certainly agree that the total petroleum hydrocarbons and coal tar risks are a key standout piece to this. Now, that kind of slightly touches on what's bullet point number 2 in the top section, which is actually inside the analytical piece of sampling that waste. What we found was there was different results, even though the methodologies that we'd asked of were the same. And that's because there is some inaccuracies or differences in the way that labs prepare and manage samples that we, again, weren't aware to accommodate for. And in fact, actually understood that certification of labs was the be-all and end-all of this bit, and didn't have the opportunity to go in and really scrutinize these practices. And when I talk about this, I mean things such as how the samples are prepared. Are they crushed, or are they taken at a granular piece? Are they cleaned? Are they washed in preparation for analysis? All of these are minute differences that can lead to an overall variance in the results that we've got in front of us. We challenged the Environment Agency on this piece, and there's certainly a lot of work away from Streetworks that's ongoing in aligning lab management and lab preparation of samples. But what we've got to do is try and build a resilient solution that can accommodate for this, and one that can educate and train the industry on managing and understanding what that piece is to all of this picture. And then finally, I suppose the last weakness of this study was that actually through the sampling approaches and the small nuances in how each trial participant delivered the study, there was variances in the actual samples being taken. Some of it unavoidable, some of it born from when we're cutting out asphalt and small fragments of asphalt or asphalt dust go into the subsoil part of the sampling. Actually, we'll start looking for hydrocarbons that's just detecting the asphalt itself, not detecting any oily nature of wastes in the subsoil. And it's again the same for pH. We've got a few results where there was a very high alkaline composition to the sample itself, when in fact it's just the concrete that we're measuring inside the sample. Now, some of these are assumptions right now. They're certainly not proven. but it shows that we've got that next step to the work. We need to go back inside the data, have a look at what these samples mean, and really drill down into the hazardous ones to see if there are any indicators that align to tell us actually we should have known that was going to be hazardous based on these factors. If there's any correlation in risks, maybe geographic, it might even be down to the management or the delivery of the excavation in itself. And finally, kind of start to map that against all of the other samples and develop this profile that can then inform the management of solution. And it might be, you know, we can prove that pack marker spray for testing coal tar is appropriate, or that actually visual comparisons of asphalt is right for the task. But we've got to deliver that final part of the study, and that's a big agreed outcome from our last meeting with the agency. Of course, we did see other risks, less frequent ones inside the initial stage sampling study, and those were the pH, the PAH, and heavy metals. We can't ignore these inside it, but what we can do is compensate for the higher risks more so in the solution. Finally, we've got some outcomes that really show that we can conclude that they're not of risk to the way that street works operate and to the waste that we generate. And those include things such as asbestos fibres that were found in very, very minute number of samples, even in the 1,600 that we took. And actually, when ACM wasn't present inside the excavation, the fibres weren't present really either. Such a minute piece. So what we can start to do now is rule these contaminants out, start to streamline what sampling and management looks like for excavation waste, and actually start to bring out some of the potential cost from if we were to sample and test for everything. So that really moves us on to this discussion with the agency. It was a couple of weeks ago now. The idea of this meeting was to further this work. We'd certainly sat on a bit of stagnation because of COVID, because of a few backwards and forwards around what our proposal was back in January, February of this year. And what we wanted to do was really drive a solution, a collaborative one forwards that kind of starts to evolve the RPS that we've seen today, the RPS that's stuck around since day one. In doing so, we agreed 3 objectives to this meeting. The first one was, well, if the RPS is deadline days back in going to be in January 2021, what's the work that's needed to deliver or to extend on that RPS? Or, as James C. said, maybe a bridging statement to further the work. What do we need to do is objective 2 for proving or developing the protocol for the classification of wastes. Do we need to think of a completely different solution? Is this the opportunity to take a step back and actually look at all the work that's been done to date and still align with the fact that is risk assessing wastes the right way to go? And then finally, of course, making sure there's a commitment to this work, a continuous piece where we can interact and engage with the agency going forwards. And certainly objective number 3 is of real importance considering some of the other outcomes from the meeting that we'll run through later. So moving on a little bit. After Clive's opening message in the meeting, a strong one around green recovery from COVID, around making sure that we can remove some hesitation from this process and really start to deliver on something tangible that we can work to as an industry, we open the floor to the agency to really get a feel for where they are along the lines of how this has been developed. And I've got their 3 headline points here on the screen. So their first one was around right waste, right person, right place, and resolving compliance issues as the priority to this process. Now, by that, they mean there is a lot linked to the classification of waste. Once you've classified it, you then have to move it, manage it, dispose of it, recycle of it, use it. There's so much extra steps inside all this process. We won't succeed if we try and deliver and focus on all X number of steps all at the same time. And the paramount piece here is about protecting human health, protecting wildlife, and what you can see in the third point, which I'll touch on in a bit. What they want to focus on, what we need to focus on as an industry is that right waste message. Are we classifying it in the first instance? Now, we got a commitment and an agreement from the Environment Agency in the last meeting. They'll certainly stick with us in this process. Once we've understood risk, we can then lead on to management of, and finally lead on to opportunity, start to deliver some value from this process as well, further refine out what the cost might be with classification, and then build on some recycling opportunities from it. Really get rid of that sort of grey area of waste operation and make it black and white so we can work to these lovely objectives of net zero and recycling wastes and less dependency on resources across the planet. Moving on a little bit, we go on to the next key message, which was the industry study demonstrates a significant step to finding and owning the solution. Now, by that, they mean we've delivered 1,600 results. That is a numerous number of results that's been delivered inside this. And actually, we've got quite strong compliments from the Environment Agency officer that's delivered on other protocols, saying that the engagement, the involvement from this group, from the wider industry, has been really, truly excellent inside of this. And what we've done is we've delivered a significant foundation of understanding risk in this first phase. These elements like TPH and coal tar certainly are now really prominent in terms of needing management, and we certainly know that there's this hazardous waste stream present in utilities arisings. What they want to see is the third point, and that's a solution that addresses the risks and demonstrates particularly that these wastes won't enter circular economies. And that's a real key prominent point for us all really at the moment. Whilst we try and be sustainable, whilst we try and take these great leaps forward, reducing our carbon and being really efficient, what we've got to think about is how these hazardous wastes that we've now identified might enter into these waste streams, how it might not be us using the recycled aggregates, using the recycled nature of these arisings, and how it might go to external places that are uncontrolled. And are we actually releasing potentially hazardous waste out beyond our own control? That's that link to endangering people and wildlife, and certainly is the key headline point that the Environment Agency need to see through the final solution. So once we started to sort of go through what was our proposal with the Environment Agency and hashed out a little bit more about the January submission, we finalised on some 4 key points, 4 key actions that we'll be taking forwards. The first one is that this will be a continuous improvement program, something very much long championed by the industry, by the working group with the agency. What we can't deal with, what we can't manage, is developing a solution tomorrow and then trying to go live with it the day afterwards. What we need is slow, incremental changes to show that we are improving with compliance, to allow for this understanding, training, cost management pieces, to allow for that natural change that's needed with such a complex matter. To do that, we need to agree some key milestones with the agency, and we need to do that for January 2021 to further that RPS to ensure that we don't go past our deadline. The second piece is that re-rationalisation of the results, going back into them, looking at the data, seeing if there are any common themes and trends, in fact, sending some of the data over to the agency to see if they've got any perspectives on the risks, and actually working collaboratively together to build that final profile of what waste risk looks like. The third one is ensuring that there's an evidence link between identifying and managing the risk. What we have got right now with this protocol is a lovely framework of underlying principles that must be delivered when classifying waste, but we still haven't got that specificity inside of it. And that specificity point is something the agency needs to see to further any solution, to have it ratified and agreed. Now there's many differing solutions to how to drive specificity into it. And that's certainly where we want to finalise with our conversation today. I suppose the final bit, and like I said earlier on, and a real key bit actually, is making sure that we don't discount alternative solutions. We started this process 2 years ago, 2 and a bit years ago, and actually even technology has come away since that point. And it's always appropriate to go back and sort of retrospectively look at what's been delivered to date and ensure that we're still going in the right direction for managing waste streams. And particularly now with very strong carbon emissions commitments across the industry, that might take a forward step in terms of priority over our final solution. So we wanted to ensure there was much time for comments and conversation today, and certainly I've seen a few comments come through. And what I want to leave you with is, where do we go from 2021, what this final solution might look like, and what we're committing to ensure that it's driven forwards. The first one is, of course, the development of a waste risk profile and driving that agreed solution which prevents risk to the environment, which we've covered today. The second point is, how does the solution deliver on specificity through the process? Now, there's many camps of thought, and we have a meeting with our steering group next week to start furthering this. Some of the camps of thought right now is that specificity could be owned by each individual organisation. They could drive and develop their own agenda and delivery plan that aligns with our framework. Or Streetworks could deliver that specificity. It might make it a little bit more difficult to work to, because it has to cover all the nuances of all the different utility types that we're representing. But actually, it might be simpler to pass it through the agency remits and to have it ratified and agreed. And there's certainly a big key bit as to what do we need to be specific about. Is it coal tar? Is it just a TPH? Is it about some low-cost methodologies to assessing it? Or do we need a lot of comprehensive management, something that parallels WM3, the current known way of assessing wastes? We then want to ensure that we'll continue to work with the agency, and that's that real strong commitment to further this work, to find opportunity to ensure that our costs are managed. We can keep a continuous review of the process once it goes live, and then further it with opportunities of recycling and driving out emissions. That includes ensuring the agency start to deliver on these other parts of the process with us as well. How do we then move the waste that we've now classified for our solution? How do we store it? How do we communicate that with all of our waste management infrastructure and supply chains? Some real vital bits that certainly need solution along the way. We want to get to the point where this is an everyday life kind of protocol or solution. Now, with continuous improvement, we might not see that light switch moment. It might not just go live. What we want to try and get is that natural evolution where actually in a year, 2 years, possibly 3 to 4, we never know really, we've actually made that change, something that's evidenceable through the agency. And certainly what we want and what we need from the industry in January is that commitment to support us along that journey of continuous improvement. If we can so rightly help the agency to review the RPS and actually bring some update to that, it might even involve some wording along continuous improvement measured and managed by the Streetworks group. And then finally, it is certainly needed support, particularly from the expert panel that we've got working in the working group. This knowledge needs to be shared, certainly with the SMEs, if it's with supply chains and just the wider industry. There's a lot to be understood here on a very technical and complex matter, and we want to provide that support as much as possible. And we had a great couple of comments yesterday as to what support we can give and the feedback that and from that feedback, how we can help that support. And certainly I want to open questions to that today as to the need for support and how we can further this. So hopefully that's enough. Certainly want to open the floor to everyone with the questions. We can talk further about the solutions, what we think about the RPS. I want to pass it back to Clive a little bit because I know you've got some thoughts on the matter as well. Thank you.
A good one. Thanks very much indeed. Well, actually, I think we've brought you all live as panelists, so at this particular stage, so that if you want to raise a hand or just come live on your camera and ask any questions that you want to, we've got a few questions lined up that we'd like to turn with, and some of the first just some practical like questions. So I think you can see Mark Whitaker asked at 3:24. Guys, was any of the testing done live on site using rapid testing methods? Do you just want to touch on that one?
Certainly. Very early on in the study, we looked at the different ways of assessing the waste arisings. It was apparent there are these very low cost methods. I mentioned one earlier with the pack marker spray. There's some high cost methods as well with analytical equipment that can be deployed out to site. What we struggled with finding was the accreditation behind these. Were they recognized and recognized ways of assessing waste? If we provided those results to the Environment Agency, would they stand up against the known methods of rigor, such as things like a lab can be UCAS accredited? Can the rapid on-site equipment be UCAS accredited as well? And it comes to a number of things, actually. Yes, the machinery might be really accurate, but it's the people using the machinery as well. And will they provide any error inside this process? For us, and certainly because we couldn't ask everyone to deploy rapid on-site testing equipment, it was a clear front runner that we went to UCAS accredited labs, that they knew and understood the work that we were delivering on. And certainly these kind of results would stand up against EA scrutiny. We didn't really want to invite any, I suppose, innovation at this point, just due to potential weaknesses down the line when we were reviewing the data. James C, I don't know if you've got any comments to that as well.
James C may have
looks like
had
he's disappeared.
a small problem with his camera there. Okay, well, let's move on then. Alan Rainford, again, it's quite a detailed question, but absolutely one worth answering at 336. Asked, was there an overall profile of hazardous waste across the nearly, or the circa 20%? Virgin Media's findings showed around 80% of the 20% was coal tars, which implies non-coal tars at only about circa 4%. Does that maths ring true with you, JT? Is that how you view it?
It was a particularly troublesome one to look at, coal tar. That's where we engaged with the Scottish Road Research Board because of the in-depth study that they're already doing. I think around in sort of Edinburgh region. There's a lot of issue with trying to identify it alone. Certain lab methodologies don't stand up to actually identifying it and use trigger points that might look like coal tar and then make the assumption that it is coal tar. Where we're getting at with what the data is we certainly identified it, and I don't think we've got any real good data that stands up to say that this X percentage of coal tar exists. And that's because of, firstly, when we worked in a variety of different development areas, none of them matched up, none of them profiled with one another to say that coal tar was apparent if it was a historic town or if it was a new one. And what we were trying to find for all of this was a trend with coal tar, and it wasn't immediately apparent at any point. We had some localized studies down in Portsmouth where asphalt was taken, and actually 80% of those samples on the asphalt all came back as hazardous coal tar. And then if we took it into inner city London, where we were kind of expecting some similar results as well with some of the made or reworked ground, we got 0% in some of the studies. And there wasn't any logical outputs from this coal tar piece. It is one it's going to be a struggle, and it's one that is one of those highlight headline points that needs that real in-depth investigation. And that example of the study that you've given with Virgin Media, you compare it to the other studies, none of them align again. And it's some clarity that we certainly need from the agency as well as to what's the most effective way of testing and understanding coal tar.
Alan, I know you want to come back on that. James Camis, did you want to add anything to any of that? Because you were off the camera for a moment.
Yes, sorry, the screen froze up for me. As you drive into Wales, it says Croeso y Gymru, which means welcome to the place where tech does not work.
Okay, all right. Look, we were just dealing with that question.
Are you in St. Mellons, by any chance?
We were dealing with the 330. We were dealing with the 336 question, James C. If you can see that, to do with VM findings, which James T has actually answered. If there's anything you wanted to add to that, James C, then go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, the chats all disappeared for me. There was an earlier one, a question about rapid on-site testing.
Yeah, we kind of dealt with that one. We kind of dealt with that one. Alan, why don't you come back? I think you want to come back at James T.
Badly worded question. My point really was, if that, dare I say, was a true reflection of the hazardous waste we're finding, and we can manage coal tars in whatever mean it is, what extra effort do we need to then put in to manage the sub 5% problem?
Yeah, I see your point now. So
it's a waiting situation. Are we overly testing for something quite small if we can cope with what seems to be the big ticket item and reasonably well understood, in terms of what we do with it,
Yeah, and there are, I suppose, an evolution in thought that we need to encourage the Environment Agency to get into. It's certainly around, firstly, if we've got such a problem with coal tar, can we manage it without testing it and just assume it's hazardous in certain regions? And there are some utility organisations that have the benefit of coal tar facilities that can manage it just down the road from them. It's more cost effective for them to not put time, money into investigating it and anymore to move it to these coal tar management sites. I suppose the second bit is what we've seen, particularly over 2020 and a little bit in 2019, is the EA have started to ease regulation on coal tar outside of this work. And you'll see other regulatory position statements around cold binding coal tar. And if you can encapsulate it in the right way, you can actually treat and manage it on site in situ and actually reuse back in the profile. And it looks like the EA are going on a journey themselves with coal tar at the same time we are, at the same time Scottish Road Research Board is. I think it's not for the group to kind of enter into this new territory of science. We kind of need to just take what's coming to our direction from these developments and try and build it into our final solution. I'd love to give you a real clear answer on it, but as you say, it's one of the headline bits of research that needs to be done. We really need to investigate into.
You want to share your thinking further on that, Alan? I mean, is there a further follow-up from you on that?
Well, I guess, I mean, much of the industry, I put my sort of commercial day job hat on, is contemplating a change prospectively. When that comes in, it sounds a little bit further along the lines now, fine. But, if there is, a lot of people are looking for the answer to try and commercialize it, quite frankly. And that's, of course, on the assumption, of course, that if we need more lab testing, then we're just going to flood the market, vis-a-vis an echo of air void core testing going back, 15 years, third edition of the second edition of the Yellow Book. So, just a couple of, downstream commercial, perceptive, what does the future lie for us? I don't think we're running away from the issue, far from it, but all hopefully responsible clients and so on and so forth. We need to do the right thing and be seen to be working with, the agencies as such.
Yeah, I think the other thing that, I touched on yesterday, but, at the workshop yesterday, which is, quite an important point for us to remember is that, what this whole activity has brought, very closely into sharp focus, Alan, is that, this is something that is is at the nexus of environmental teams in companies and the Environment Agency and Streetworks teams, and sometimes they don't completely overlap, and sometimes this type of stuff is not well understood by our Streetworks teams. And so there was a request and ask yesterday, just on our side, if you will, for a greater degree of that information to be made available to people, because it's an extremely well populated EPG, this one, James, isn't it, really? By and large, and actually a pretty good mix of environmentalists, if you like, and Streetworks experts. But there are some knock-ons along the lines of what you just talked about, and we need to be able to solutionize that well and solutionize that properly. I agree. Okay.
Great example of what's a specific risk to a certain utility type. If we look at communications and the depth that's been dug into, coal tar is a larger proportion of that risk. Yeah. And if we start talking about the foul sewers, and actually then you bring in all the subsoil risks that could potentially be apparent. Absolutely. That's kind of where we're talking about that specificity piece. Actually there's some benefit in starting to hand out the work a little bit to the organizations or even the industry segments that sit within this, and start to say, well, what's that specific risk to you? What do you need to see through that? And what does the solution need to cover? I heart of hearts, and this is just my own personal feeling, I don't think we can deliver a comprehensive solution that sits up here through Streetworks. I think there needs to be something in between that actually starts to make it specific for the utility types.
Okay.
And I think just one point on that, I mean, I totally echo the depth for the foul sector. And there's a sub-dimension that in my mind, of course, that could be probably better covered in capital works, new development of new sewers. It's the reactive repairs and maintenance domain of that sector, because that'll have the same material, just on a much smaller scale.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, Alan, thanks for those questions. James, just in terms of tracing that relationship and how we take things forward, did you want to say a little bit about the actual, I would say, the elevation of the conversation in EA? I don't think we have any questions, but it's just worth reassuring people on Chris Deed and Paul Eccleshall and Catherine Jones, the gradation of our conversation. Do you want to say a few words on that?
Do you want to take it, James C?
On the spot now. What's the question again, Clive? Oh, go on, James, you can go.
So I'll pick it up. Don't worry. So yeah, certainly. I mean, whilst we were through initial development of this process, we were working with the hazardous waste regulation team and an advisor that sits in that team. Catherine, who's been part of this process now for the majority of it, I think going on a year and a half, nearly two. We've been working quite locally with her for quite some time, and then with Clive engaging up through Malcolm, who's the head of waste regulation, to kind of oversee this process. What we needed was a little bit more of a wider perspective going into this, someone that can kind of see beyond just the hazardous waste impacts and look at sustainability, look at the movement, the management, and actually understand what it means to regulate the industry. And we were very fortunate to have Chris Deed on the last phone call, so heading up that hazardous waste team and reporting into Malcolm, who could kind of see that bigger picture to this, understands the double kind of regulation piece that you were talking about yesterday, Clive, isn't it? You know, you've got one aim of trying to achieve hazardous waste, but you've got the other regulation aim of trying to ensure essential utility services are in place, timely managed and repaired in the right way. And he can kind of see...
Catherine reports to Chris, doesn't she? So it was great to get the perspective of her manager. He was able to see the bigger picture and a way out of it. And that you know, and Paul Eccleshall, wasn't it, is another technical expert, but he has experience of working with other sectors with similar protocols, similar waste classification decisions. So I think the three of them together as a team working with us, will see us through. Prior to that, it was very much Catherine on her own, and she picked it up from Graham, didn't she? Probably without asking for it.
I think that's right. Yeah. Okay. Good. I think we covered that off. What else did I want to touch on this afternoon? I don't see any other questions in the toes at the moment. Please, anyone, if you want to verbally jump on the wire, just bring your mic live and shout out. Obviously, we brought the EA work and James T and their team to the level of an EPG, as it were, rather than a working group within Streetworks UK, and that's reflective of the importance and the value and the cruciality now to go forward at that level with it. And just a word to say, I mean, I think, you know, to date we've had pretty good support for the working group, and we're hoping that will continue with the EPG as well. But James C and James T, if I ask you to you know, stare into that crystal ball, you know, some of the members on the call here today, Streetworks members on the call here today, you know, have got boardrooms and executive directors and managing directors who are kind of you know, asking them what's going to happen. Give us your best guess, James C and James T. What do you think, if we look at it from, let's say, 18 months from now, what would be not what we necessarily want to have happen? What do you sense is likely to happen in terms of those options that you've outlined running up to this? What do you think is the most likely one? James C, why don't you kick us off?
I think it's going to be an ongoing process. I mean, initially the working group was set up, and it sort of had the feeling of a task and finish group, which might last a year, 2 years. You know, now we're into our third year. The development of the EPG is great, and that shows it as a permanent fixture in the sort of Streetworks groupings. And I think we'll continue to work with our regulator. Regulator wants to see some action from us, see us moving things into the right direction, and then that might focus their attention on my favourite subject, the local authorities.
I didn't think we were going to get away without mentioning the local authorities. Do you want to add a little bit to that, James C, since we got there?
Yeah, thank you. I suppose the focus for 2021 and focus for organisations and taking it forwards definitely resonates the points that James C was saying. It is about, you know, following that continuous improvement journey together. We've been very successful working together as an industry, very successful at combating what is arguably something that should have been looked at nearly 20 years ago now. And to keep improving and to show and demonstrate to the EA that we are making a change, we recognise our risks and actually demonstrate that even before this, we're not an irresponsible industry. We've always put in place controls and measures. What we just want to see is the furthering of that. I think it just needs that good buy-in still. And the formation of the EPG is great, but what we do need is more members to be involved in helping steer some of the discussions. We need as much input as possible into this process to make sure that what our outcome is a real good, fair, balanced view of what everyone thinks as an industry and taking this forward, because there's certainly so many implications as to just changing the classification of waste on how we deliver these activities. Doesn't matter what it is, planned, reactive, immediate, or what you're delivering.
Okay, well put, well expressed. James C, I'm going to let you have another re-attack on the LA's issue. Since it does vex you, how are you going to take this forward, James C?
Well, I'm just going to continue to try and sow the seed with the EA. I mean, NRW. I work closely with NRW daily, and their waste expert I have a monthly surgery with, and she's very much looking at what the EA are up to, and they've either got to. I mean, NRW do often adopt the same protocols as the EA set up. They might go their own way. They certainly do on agricultural issues because we're a very rural country, but they might want to talk to the local government association in Wales, Welsh Local Government Association. There might be something different for Wales. So I just want to sow the seed with as many people as I can. That's why I bring it up every time.
Excellent.
Finally, I need to have a chat with our facilities manager about the office lighting at this time of day. James T, you've got the same problem.
Don't mind the environment. We need a bit of health and safety over there, guys. Okay, all right. Look, we'll draw this session to a close, and it remains only for me to thank James Camis and James Thornton for, as usual, putting together a really informative and useful session. Thanks to those of you who had those questions and had stirred with that debate for us. And this brings to a close of Streetworks conference. Of course, it's not completely over, as it were, because let me remind you, at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, we are announcing the Streetwork Awards by online. So it'll be coming out on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and on the website, who the award winners are for our 8 awards this year. And we'll be happily celebrating those who have done such a terrific job. But for short of that, can I ask you just to give a thumbs up in the chat, Tote, for James C and James T for doing such a great job. Thanks for drawing it together, and thanks for what you continue to do. And good luck with the EPG as you take that in critical and important work forward. At that, I'll give everyone back about 4.5 minutes of their day today, and wish you all well. And thank you very much indeed for joining us this afternoon. Great to see you all. Cheerio for now. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.